Alright, it's time for us to begin construction of our simple level, and our first step is going to be to rough out the primary surfaces of our level using BSP brushes. However, before I do that, I want to take just a moment and give you a quick primer, sort of an introductory lesson into BSP in general, with some things that you really ought to know. Now, just to kind of get us warmed up, I'm going to take my perspective viewport here and maximize it by clicking the Maximize Viewport button here inside the viewport toolbar. And we can see that we have the red builder brush right here in the middle of the view. Now, with just that basic 256 cube red builder brush, I'm going to come over here to the toolbox on the left-hand side and click the CSG Add button. Now, currently, I'm in unlit mode, so we immediately see some constructive solid geometry appear. It's got the null material, that basic blue and white checker applied to it, and that's great. Now, I'm going to select my red builder brush again, tap the spacebar a couple of times until I see the Move widget, or the Translation widget. I'll call it the Move widget from time to time. And I'm going to move this around. Now you'll notice that my red builder brush is snapping pretty far as I move, and that's because currently my drag grid, located in the lower right-hand corner of the view, is currently set to a snap of 32 units. So I'm getting these nice big snaps that are lining up real well. So all I'm going to do is take my red builder brush and make sure that it crosses over just the corner of our additive brush we just created, and I'm going to click CSG Subtract. And you can see what that did here. We have a solid piece of geometry that now had the space of the red builder brush carved away from it. However, if I come up here to the various view modes here inside my viewport toolbar, at the far end I have brush wireframe. So let me go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to move my red builder brush out of the way. And let's take a quick look at what we have. I've created two BSP brushes, one additive brush and one subtractive brush. And the result of those two brushes is the shape that we see here. And this is the actual surface with which our players can interact. They can bump into this, they can shoot it, jump on it, climb on it, etc. and so forth. All defined with these BSP brushes. If I take one of these brushes and I edit it in some way, so for instance, if I grab the subtractive brush, which is the yellow brush, and I slide it out of the way just a little bit, not to where it's completely away from the additive brush, but just so it's not overlapping quite so much, and come back over here to unlit mode, you'll notice that nothing has changed. If I want to see this solid geometry update, I need to rebuild my geometry. Located up here inside the main toolbar, you'll see a button called Build Geometry for Current Level. Anytime you make a change to your BSP brushes, you have to update the world geometry by clicking the Build Geometry button. So we give that a second to calculate. Right now we don't have to worry about any error messages we get, and we can see that that world geometry does indeed update. Now, that's just a really quick demo of some of the primary ideas behind using BSP, where you're going to create additive brushes to add geometry into the level. You'll create subtractive brushes to go back and carve that geometry away, and thereby create more complex shapes. Now, with just that in mind, I just want to give you a quick overview of some of the BSP concepts that you ought to be aware of. So, for starters, BSP equals binary space partition. That's just what the acronym stands for. All it is a way for you to define areas of solid mass and other areas where mass can be carved away, essentially additive and subtractive brushes. BSP brushes are used to define the primary surfaces in your level. Now, as you get more and more used to using UDK, you'll probably discover that that's kind of a debatable thing. You can technically get away with building an entire level without using a single BSP surface if you're so inclined, though if nothing else, BSP can be a nice quick way to rough out the surfaces of your level, even if later on you end up replacing all of your BSP brushes with static meshes further down the road. Now, Unreal is going to generate constructive solid geometry, or CSG, also known as world geometry. So if you hear the word world geometry, it's the same thing, from your BSP brushes. So real quick, let's just give a quick demo of that. I'm going to jump back over to UDK, and here inside brush wireframe mode, we can see our two brushes. However, if I switch over to just regular wireframe mode, we can see the constructive solid geometry, or world geometry, that was created as a result of those BSP brushes. So if I deselect, that actual brush goes away, and this is the actual world geometry that was created from calculating the surfaces of our BSP brushes. Let's jump back into our show for just a minute. Now, BSP brushes can be moved and edited, while CSG cannot. So over here inside UDK again, I can't even select this piece of solid geometry. I mean, I can click on various faces of it, but that's really just for applying materials to it. It's not going to really do me any good. I can't come in here and move this piece around. If I want to move this block, what I need to do is go into brush wireframe mode and move the brushes that are generating that solid geometry. And thereby that'll create a recalculation. However, changing a BSP brush, changing its position, editing its shape, anything you do to it is going to require that you rebuild your geometry to regenerate that CSG. So as you lay down your brushes, you're going to start to get some geometry. If you go back and make a change to those brushes, any kind of change at all, you're going to have to rebuild, which you saw me do just a minute ago. Now that's just kind of a quick crash course into BSP and how it's used. Now here are some guidelines. Now before I even show them to you, understand that all of these are, by definition, they're just guidelines. So at any point while you're working, you may find you'll be better off to break any or all of these. But for starters, use additive levels only. When you create a new level inside UDK, you'll find that you can create an additive or a subtractive level. Generally, it's best to stick with additive levels. They will build more quickly when calculating your pre-baked lighting. You'll get better performance out of them. Generally, it's just a good idea to stick with them. Occasionally, you can use subtractive, but if you're just starting with UDK, I would just recommend you avoid them and just stick with additive for the time being. Now, moving on. Keep your brushes simple. You might have noticed that if we take a look at the world geometry that came in from just that little thing we put together here. So let's go back to regular wireframe. We're already starting to get a lot of edges, a lot of extra vertices. So it's a good idea for you to keep your geometry as simple as possible. If you can avoid making a really complex BSP brush, then please try to avoid that and let static meshes handle your detail, which is the point we'll bring up here in just a minute. Align your brushes as best you can. Make sure that your edges are touching one another. So if you have a floor BSP brush and you're setting walls on it, don't just run the two through each other. Make sure that the bottom of the wall surface touches the very top of the floor, just to keep things nice and tidy. It'll help you out later on as you're trying to make sure that everything aligns just right. So keep your brushes aligned. And to do that, make use of the drag grid. You can change those drag grid settings if you need finer snaps or larger snaps, but make use of it. It'll make your life a lot easier. Make sure you align your textures. You're going to see this more as we start to build the BSP surfaces for our level. But sometimes as you subtract one surface away from another, you can get some interesting things happening to the texture by default. It can get some interesting placement. And you just want to make sure that you go in and keep those textures aligned, because it'll be a dead giveaway that you have some sort of a problem in your surface. Next, let static meshes handle detail. Now this is just one of those whenever possible kind of things. If you're only using UDK and you don't have the means to create your own static meshes, you may very easily come into a situation where you don't have the meshes that you want for a particular project, and so you may end up having to use a BSP brush to get the surface that you're looking for. That's fine up to a point, but if you can avoid it, if you can use static meshes for things like stairways and walkways and decorations, then please do that, because they're far more efficient than BSP. Now, the very bottom, remember brush order. And I want to jump into UDK and give a quick demonstration of this. So let's go back over to our brush view, and these two brushes, I'm just going to just nuke them. So select, delete, goodbye. And let's go back over to unlit mode, and we still see our geometry, even though the brushes have been deleted, and that's because we need to rebuild. So as soon as I rebuild and close out our error window, everything's gone. Now here's our red builder brush again. Check this out. I'm going to come in and make a subtractive brush first. Now this is an additive level, meaning this great big infinite space we see around us is a vacuum. There's nothing here. So if I make a subtractive brush first, and let's jump over to brush wireframe just so we can confirm that. So there's my subtractive brush. This results in nothing. It's like you're taking nothing away from nothing, so you just get a blank vacuum space. Now I'm going to take my red builder brush and I'm going to slide it so it kind of intersects this subtractive space, and then I'm going to click the CSG add button. So now I have a relationship very similar to what we had before, with an additive brush and a subtractive brush passing through one another. So let's switch to unlit and see what we have. Well, that's interesting. It looks like the subtractive section hasn't actually been carved away. Maybe we just need to rebuild. What do you think? Let's go ahead and just click on Build Our Geometry one more time up here in the main toolbar, and we'll close out our arrow window, and still we don't get that carved away section. This is due to brush order. We created the subtractive brush first, and then we created the additive brush. So in essence, it's like saying, all right, we want vacuum, and then we want to add mass to it, meaning we're not going to get this carved away section. If we want that section, that subtractive brush, to actually look like it's being carved away, then we need to make sure that that is calculated last, that we add in our solid geometry, and then we carve away. So order of operations becomes very important. To fix this is very simple. I'm just going to select my subtractive brush and right-click on it, and we get a lot of different options that pop up here inside the menu. Amongst others, you'll see the order of the brush, and we can change this either to first or last. Let's go ahead and set it to last. Now, let's jump back over here to unlit mode. Still nothing has changed, but now let's recalculate by clicking the Build Geometry button, and voila. We now have a carved away section because we told the engine to calculate the subtractive brush last. Now that is a quick and down and dirty look into the world of BSP brushes. That's probably even just a little bit more information than you absolutely need to know at this point, though as you start creating your own levels, having this bit of information at your disposal is going to allow you to make more educated decisions on how you use the BSP brushes in your level. So with this understanding, let's now move forward and start to create the BSP surfaces for our simple level. That'll wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.